We got this side all sanded and blocked out. We kept the curve. We were able to keep our line. We're pretty happy with it where it is. We sanded this all out in here. Now here we didn't put a lot on, but I had to go through because we had a low spot here and maybe a little bit there. That's how far we had to go to get through, which was barely nothing. It probably wouldn't have shown anyway, but now we know it's good. There's a few spots we know we got to hit with primer again later to seal it before we paint the lid. Now, I know I did a video where I showed basically we had that quadrant of the trunk done. I did this quadrant, the flat part, on camera, which was in the last video. So I went ahead then, I came down by hand. When I say by hand, what we were doing is we were using this guy. Now the first go we went with a 120. You can do 80, 180. We did 120. We're going to do a gentle 180, probably 220, and we can seal it. But you got to kind of judge what you've got. Now we used this, and we literally came down like so with the two hands, and then this way. So we're going around the curve, and we kept moving it back and forth as we did it. And we were almost through there. But luckily we had enough material, we didn't have to keep going. It's real nice and straight and flat. And then there's a little bit there we'll take out yet. But you can see, like, this is barely there, so the next grit will be fine, like the 180. We didn't come down into the curve. There we did. So basically we took this block with 180, just a 6-inch piece split in half, and I cut it like so. We'll have to get some more paper for that. I noticed lately when I'm going through the videos, people are posting how they get the flat part flat, which we did this again with that, but they don't seem to show these nice curved areas. So I'm going to show you this. You can see there's a little bit of peel or texture, but it's almost nothing, and it becomes pretty much nothing as it goes. So let me show you how we would do this, and also how we would do this. Because I've noticed, like I say, a lot of the videos, they don't seem to go too detailed with that. They kind of did what I did in the last video. It was a Friday, we did so much, it was time to stop. But sorry for the shaking. Here's what we're going to do. So this has a round in it, like a concave. So we got our 180 on a round block. Now as far as sanding this down goes, all we have to do is sand the texture off of it. But we also want to keep going back and forth until we get everything as flat as possible. So I'm going on a 45 degree, maybe a little more than that. I'm also turning this as I'm going, which gives it a little more cut. And you work it a little bit, and then you go down a little further. And then we change directions. So that takes off most of the orange peel. Let's have a look so I can see what you're seeing. Sorry about that. But I don't know if you can see that on camera. So you can see where it's shiny and nothing's been done. Then you come into the smooth texture. Well, texture's gone, and then you see here there's still a little bit of that there. Now you can't just sand this, you got to keep blocking that out so the whole thing runs fairly straight. Now, on this particular edge where it sits on the car, you could get away with some inconsistencies, but to me it's just good practice that you refine how you do these things every time. You know, this is an old piece of sheet metal that was stamped prior to 1963, and then they just pinched it on. So how good is it going to be, even if it's never been damaged, right? And cars weren't perfect back in the 60s. I know people like to glamorize that they were. Look, nobody looked at little inconsistencies and as far as gaps go and everything else. Even Cadillac in 63, I'd say there was a certain amount of good enough attitude. And quite frankly, if you got a 2020 or newer vehicle out in your yard, you should go look at it and try to find things like orange peel and things just like that. You're going to find it. And when you start looking at panel gap and fitment in new cars, they actually, everything is curved and angled funny. And the reason they do that, it takes your eyes away from a lot of that gapping. So things don't have to be straight but still look okay. But now that I told you that, go look at your brand new stuff and you'll see that it's not, well, it ain't perfect either. We just think it is, because in our mind, it was new. And I know we've been seeing a lot, I've noticed a lot of the comments on various channels lately about no matter what you do, you'll never get the OEM finish. There's nothing better than the OEM finish. It'll never be as good as when, you know, Ford, Chev, Dodge, Toyota, whatever, OEM. Yeah, you guys don't know what you're looking at. And I can say that with full confidence, because quite frankly, OEM isn't even OEM. Especially with the old cars back in the day. I mean, you take a 67 Chevrolet Camaro in 1967, a lot of those cars were dirt cheap. They were driven for 4 or 5 years, and they were sold as winter beaters that were dirt cheap. And the ones that survived, that made the 80s, when people wanted older cars again because they hated the new stuff. That would have been me in the 90s. I was one of those guys. In the 90s, when everyone was driving Ford Escorts and Tempos and Chevy Chevettes, what a good car those were. And then you had the, well, Mopar, I mean the K car, really. So these were terrible little cars at the time. So in the 90s, most people were driving cars like, you know, younger people that were 6 to 10 years old, but not me. I hated that. Those cars were terrible for any car enthusiast. So even at a young age, like when I was 18, I was driving around in an 80 Grand Prix T-top, and the 301 was long yanked out of it, and we had a Wildcat engine in it, out of a Buick. So I had a little bit of muscle and a good looking G-body car. And I think those cars in the 70s, those land yachts, like all the Malays area, great big cars with great big engines, but for the price of gas, anyway, with the price of gas, I guess they figured, you know, smaller cars would take over and so on. But I had a hard time with that. I couldn't do that. And then the next best thing was pickup trucks, because, you know, those cars were what they were. And the reason I keep getting a little bit and then moving back is just to make sure it's all on the same plane. Now, there's a little shiny dark spot here. I'm avoiding that. I'm only going to go back and forth across that at the very end to keep it consistent. And again, concentrating on this particular area to make it nice. You can see we broke through a bit. It's probably overkill. It's not a spot that you've noticed, but I mean, if you had anything really bad, it might be noticeable. But I mean, if you're going to block the rest of the car, block everything. There's a little low spot right here from when they squished this and they made this corner edge. But we go in straight, and this actually tips out. I looked at that when it was on the car. So what we're going to do is I'm sanding a little bit shy of here. We're going to try to get the orange peel off, and then it's just going to slightly have a little bit of a tip up, if that's okay. Because of where it is. So that's what I would call acceptable. There's a little bit right in there. And it's only right here, but I'm going across because I want it to all be pretty much the same. And I found if you figure out how to block a car really, really well, and more importantly, get your body lines really, really sharp, that they match from the door to the fender, you know, to the front fender, the rear quarter, make sure everything flows. Even if you do say a mediocre or even a not so great paint job, because it's straight, when you look at a car that was done, you know, a little bit better in the bodywork area, it's going to look like a better car. So I'm moving down about an inch at a time as I do that. Now I'm going in the other direction. I got to stay real consistent with that because that rounds off the corner beautifully and exactly the same all the way down. There's a bit of a shine spot here or there. That's okay. We're going to hit that again with a smaller grit. So we did this whole side in 13 minutes. So we broke through. Let me back up, give you some perspective of what we're looking at. This is where I said we had a little line, but there is marks in it, so we know it's pretty close. So when we go over it with our, that was the 180, we'll go over it with 220. I'll make sure to get that real good. We'll sand this real nice. And I mean, I'm going to sand it at 220, and then we're going to use a sealer. But if you're using a different primer at 180, you just kind of go over this a wee bit more, and you could paint. Well, you're going to prime it, and then probably sand it again with the other primer. And then people go, you know, like, say you have a corner like this. Would you just go in and do it by hand? In this case, on this side you could. On the other side, we had a little bit of a ripple in the orange peel. But what I like to do is I come back to where I was sanding. And again, this is what works for me. You may have a different technique. Just wanted to finish that off. I'll come across here when I get this. But this is what works for me. And the thing is to not sand in the same spot over and over again. there's ripples in it. You don't see them, but I'm finding ways to get in there, and I'm not putting the tip down to dig anywhere. I'm letting it float over, so I'm sanding here and not here. It's kind of following the shape. And I mean, look, people say, well, what if you slightly change the shape? This had a big metal patch put in. This, actually, no, this side was like this, and the other side had a big patch. So like, we've already created a shape. And I mean, if this line comes down and disappears and it flows, that's all it has to do, right? Don't overthink it trying to, well, what if this isn't exactly what they had? Well, who cares? Pretty good chance things have moved, shifted, shrunk, and all kinds of things, and it was already no longer what they had done in 63 anyway. And again, like I said, 60s, I'm guaranteeing you, they didn't care as much as you think they did. There we go. Just get a little bit of a sharp edge so I can see it. That's why mechanics don't like this. They like to take a part off, put a part on, make it good, in and out, fast. It's generally a different temperament you need for that work. For here, everything is just patience and a little trial and error. And you never want to go too far. But look, if you do, and you sand something out or whatever, there's no reason. This is an epoxy primer. If something bad happened and you made a mistake, you can put filler in it, block it right back in, and seal it. So there's lots of room for error in this, as long as you remember to go over it and fix the errors when you're done. I have not done a whole bunch of trunk lids like this. I'm just winging it, kind of based off a little experience and maybe common sense. I don't know. Don't know if I have that or not, but let's pretend I do. We're making that edge a little bit soft. It seems to blend in nice. I'm just using this paper, creating a little, right? That's not a technique or a way. That's just me making it to where I'm happy with it. I'm just gonna come off camera a little bit because I want to come down a little further. I don't know how far you can follow me. There, I'm very happy with it now. And I know you can't see everything I can see with a camera, but pretty close, so. That's done. Body line disappears, goes to nowhere. I still got a block down here. That's going to get blocked with this right across. You can see how the body line comes down. I know the dust throws it off. But I know that's going to be sweet. Anyway, if you get something from the video, great. And if you don't, well, that's okay too. Sorry about that. I'm definitely no professional movie magic guy. And I'm not going to waste too much more of your time and show you all the way. We'll just do this area. You'll get the idea. There's a bit of peel right there, so I'm going to come back over it. I can't go too far because right here, there's a change of color to another primer and I don't want to hit metal. So that's where that's got to stop. But I'm going to take this bottom, and I'm not coming right to the edge, but I'm going to get as close as I can and leave a little bit of a shiny spot. And when I get the whole thing done, we'll get that right at the end. Yeah, it's going to be good. We have a real nice straight line. We don't want to lose it. That's why I'm not coming over and hitting it too hard. But I am going up into where we came down with this, like so. A little bit of orange peel. And once I get that out, that's good enough there. Come down into here. And you don't want to go across this way for a long time because you'll dig a ditch and you'll end up with another line in here. So that's why you got to always go up. We're just avoiding that one little spot. I gotta go over it sometimes because you gotta keep it flat. You're seeing the other primer in below. Yeah, we got it. So like I said, that spot up there took 13 minutes. This took, what, a few minutes? Going up and down. You can see that peak. So when you sand over the peak, you don't want to go over it and round the peak off. You want to keep your hands on this side of the peak and just go over it, and it'll just miss. And what that'll do from both sides is it'll keep that peak right in the middle where it's supposed to be. You can even go up and down, and you can kind of see it. And at the end, we'll just soften that the way we did over there. A little bit of paper. Just make sure you're consistent all the way up to here. And then here it disappears almost to nowhere. There's like a peak. But when I used this, we did the same thing. We just went up to it when we came this way. When we went this way, we kept our hands back and went over it. And it left the peak. And then we just went over that by hand. So again, everything takes time. And what I'd like to show, some of the blocking videos, they're blocking the whole car. And it might seem when you watch it, if you haven't done this, it might seem as though it's going to take forever. But like, don't get discouraged. What I'm blocking right now is hard to block. And you can see how fast we're getting through it. Now this stuff pretty much falls right on the floor. You don't get a cloud of dust. If I wasn't on camera, I'd be wearing a mask anyway. You should always, you know, whatever the sheets say, your tech data sheets, your safety data sheets, material safety data sheets, whatever you want to call them, you should do what it says. Now, if I was running a machine on this, there'd be dust everywhere. And keep in mind, this is a two-part epoxy, and even though it dries in so many hours or whatever, which in this case something like 4 or 5 days, it's still curing and shrinking and doing stuff. Even though it's minimal, it's still going to do that for quite some time. So all this stuff is a little bit active, and it's epoxy. So I'm going to say maybe you get a little bit in you and you're okay, but you probably don't want to do that, you know, more than making videos. And I know I've got a couple videos and people said, oh, I couldn't hear you good, you were wearing a mask. Well, whatever. Sometimes I'm making a big dust cloud, and you definitely don't want certain products, and not just fresh products that are kind of active like I suggested, but if you're doing an old car, like, you don't know, like, even if you do everything you can to be safe around lead, you don't know how much lead or something chromium or something is in the paint. Who knows what they put in it back in the 60s, and you're just blasting that off and there's dust everywhere. But liquid chemicals are bad for you, but dry chemicals are bad too, so keep that in mind. So now I'm going to come down a little bit harder in a couple spots, and I'm going to kind of refine that body line, that corner. Now, as I did on the other side, I'm taking less off this one than I did on that top, because this can be a little sharper here. I'm not spinning it anymore, so I'm trying to be real precise. We're going to take a little more off of that, but not until we use our other paper. So between the last video, this video, and probably about 10 minutes to do that, you've got a trunk that's been all rebuilt across the bottom. All the inside underneath was all rebuilt. By rebuilt, I mean this is all brand new steel all the way across. We made all that. Everything you see in this shot is pretty much new steel all the way across. So it was a lot of trauma, little body work. But this, as far as I'm concerned, we are going to sand it with one more grit lower. This can be sealed and painted. This is good to go. We're happy with that. So I'm not going to be working on this trunk lid for a while now. Because of this, and I mean, this is a cured substrate and it's sanded. You could clean this, sand it with a 320 or 400, and it depends on what paint you're using. Again, read your tech sheets. But if you sand this down to the level of that, you could technically paint this as is. And then the idea back in the day was you'd put a little color on these spots first, let that flash, do your first coat, and then do your two, medium to wet coats, and then clear coat it, or enamel, or whatever you're doing. I like a little bit of gray sealer on something like that, even if I don't do the whole thing. And the only reason why is your color, like if you have see-through, you don't want to get halos or dark and light spots in it. Now, this is going to be a dark burgundy-ish metallic red, so not a big deal. But honestly, for the little bit it takes to hit those, just put a bit of primer on them. So that's it. I'm happy with that.